Hi. In this lesson, we're going to look at shape, form, and space and how it relates to art. The objectives, I'd like you to explain the difference between a shape and a form, observe more carefully the shapes and forms in the space around you, and understand the expressive qualities of shape, space, and form in a work of art. The vocabulary I'd like you familiar with would include form, free-form shape, geometric shape, shape, space, positive space, and negative space. We'll start with shape. Shape is a two-dimensional area that is defined in some way. For example, you could draw the outline of a circle on a sheet of paper. You've created a shape. You could also define that area with a contrast in value, or a color, or texture. Any way you define a two-dimensional area, you have created a shape. Now, some shapes can be defined with a simple mathematical formula. We would call these geometric shapes. Basic geometric shapes would include things like circles, squares, and triangles. How would you define this? 4 sides, all the same length, 4 corners, all 90 degrees. How about this one? 3 sides, 2 are the same length, 3 corners, 2 are 70 degrees, 1 is 40 degrees. How about this? All points on the outside edge are an equal distance from the center. Now, those are geometric shapes. A free-form shape is irregular and uneven. You can't define it with a simple formula. Sure, you could have an XY axis and articulate each point on the outside edge of it, but that's not a simple formula. So free-form or irregular shapes, you have to see them to understand them. So what's the difference between a shape and a form? Well, I've kind of hinted at it. A shape is two-dimensional. A form would be three-dimensional. Now, shapes and forms exist in space, whether it's two-dimensional space or three-dimensional space. All objects take up space. And the shapes and the forms are defined by the space around them and within them. They depend on that space to exist. In both two- and three-dimensional space, the subject would be called the positive space. This is the space that's filled with stuff. It's not empty. The empty space around the subject is called the negative space. So positive space is filled with stuff. Negative space is empty. But here's the thing. Both positive and negative space have shapes and forms. Let's look at a shape to understand this. Is this positive space or is this negative space? In other words, is it a ball? Or is this a circular hole? Simple shapes defined with outlines and contrast, that doesn't give us enough information. Without shadows or contour lines, it becomes difficult to know if the shape is positive or negative. Now here we have 3 shapes defined by 2 lines. What is it a drawing of? Is it 2 faces looking at each other? Or is it a vase? Well, would it help to change the contrast? We still don't know. But in drawing, it doesn't matter. Whether it's positive space or negative space, both are important in the drawing. You can't get one right and the other wrong. They both have to be drawn correctly. When we look at this as a drawing of 2 faces, the shape of the vase is still there. It's still equally as important as the shapes of the faces. And if this were to be a drawing of a vase, the shapes of the two faces are still there. So when drawing this, it's important to look at both. Seeing the negative space as a shape can help you keep your subject in proportion. So you should start your drawings by blocking in the negative space as simple shapes. This can be exceptionally useful when drawing hands or people or animals. Let's try one. I'll start by blocking out two triangular shapes. Are these positive space or negative space? Doesn't really matter. They're still important. This triangle right here is very important to the drawing. Whether it's positive space or negative space, it's important. If I get that angle of that line incorrect, it changes the drawing. Still don't know. Positive space, negative space. Doesn't matter. You have to draw both. The relationships of the shapes to each other is just as important. When drawing Spider-Man, the shape of the triangle between his torso, his thigh, and his forearm was very important. If any one of those lines had been drawn incorrectly, it would have changed the entire drawing. Seeing the subject as negative space and seeing the background as positive space can sometimes help. You have to learn to draw both. When you're drawing, it's important to consider the shapes in the negative space. As an exercise, we're going to try to do some drawings where we will render the background without drawing the subject. Thank you.